This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball. Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for a promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. Maybelle Blair is a living baseball legend. In All the Way, Cat D. Williams' new book, Maybelle's short time in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League is only a sliver of what makes her so special. Maybelle's personality truly jumps off the page. We talked with Cat about Maybelle's life and continued influence on the game, as well as the International Women's Baseball Center, where Williams serves as CEO. Enjoy. Cat, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be on here and talk a little bit about baseball and Maybelle Blair.
I always like to ask my guests to start, where does this idea first start for you?
Well, it first started when I first met Maybelle Blair, which was in 2003. And I became involved first as a history professor and a researcher with the women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League as an observer, getting to know those women, writing about them, teaching about them. For your readers, if you haven't read the book yet, which you may not have because it's just coming out, if you read those first few pages, you'll get a sense of how the earth moves when you first meet Maybelle Blair. And so it really, I guess the seed was planted there, but it wasn't until about 10 years later that I started, after working with her, getting to know her, I really started to see the common thread that runs all the way through her life. And that is doing everything she can to put girls and women on a baseball field, to give them equal access and opportunity. And that's when the book really started to come into focus.
What went into the research for this?
Well, as I said, from 2003 on, I began doing research about the league itself and about women's baseball. I have 2 previous books, one, The All-American Girls After the AAGPBL, and one called Isabel Lefty Alvarez, The Life of a Cuban-American Baseball Star. Both books, obviously, focused on the All-American Girls Professional Baseball Leagues. The research, in many ways, was sort of always moving forward. As I got to know Maybelle, though, I realized, and it's not necessarily exclusive to her, but she is the one I know. She is the one who has done a lot in her later years. And so I realized that this thread, this way that many of those women, and especially Maybelle, they made a place for themselves. They made a place for girls and women coming after them. And for Maybelle, she came out as a lesbian on the stage at Tribeca at age 95. She is still carving paths for people. And so that's the thing. The research about the league and about the baseball was kind of already there. And of course, researching her life was a whole different experience. And I did interviews, obviously, with her, with lifelong friends, with her family, many of the other players who played with her and knew her. So it was a great experience, actually.
Was she receptive to the book? Did she understand why you wanted to write the book?
Well, not at first. I mean, in fact, she was like, "Oh, nobody cares about me. I'm not a superstar." And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And this is one of the things that I said in the book. Yeah, if you just look at her time on the field, and most sports books, and I'm sorry, I find those not to be that interesting. Most sports books are about my batting average and how many strikeouts I had and I was the best at this and I was the best at that. To me, that is not what's important about sports. What's important about sports is what it gives to you, what you give to it, how it shapes you. And especially for girls and women who want to play the game of baseball, it is not easy. It is not easy for girls and women to play the game of baseball because we're told, "Oh, you mean softball. Yeah, go play softball. Girls play softball, boys play baseball." Well, you can edit this out if you want, but that's bullshit. I mean, we have always been part of the game of baseball. We've always played, we've always umpired, we've always coached, tended the fields, owned the teams, kept the scores. We've always been part of baseball. And there is absolutely no reason we can't continue to be, but we are met with resistance at every single turn. And so that is crucial. And so when I started to talk to her about that piece of it, she was like, "Well, yeah, maybe." And I'm going to read this very short quote. It's in my book. It is a quote by Amelia Earhart. And the quote means a lot to me. As I'm talking to Maybelle at one point, I realized, oh my God, this is what this book is about. The quote is this: "Some of us have great runways already built for us. If you have one, take off. But if you don't have one, realize it is your responsibility to grab a shovel and build one for yourself and for those who will follow after you." That is what Maybelle Blair has done since 1930. So when I was able to talk to her about that, she said, "Well, okay, I guess yeah, okay, we can do that." But you will notice there are no stats, not to speak of in this
Right,
book.
right.
This is her story. And she will tell you first off, she's not a superstar baseball player. She was a good baseball player, but it is about the bigger issues. And so when I was able to sort of put it in that context, she agreed. And hopefully, anyway, she's pleased with it.
You've mentioned you've had this relationship with her since 2003. Um, how did that affect the book? Do you think that made it easier for you to converse with her or get information out of her? Or what was the effect of that?
Oh my god, it was like pulling teeth. I mean, here's the thing. Of course, my friendship with her opened that access, right? I mean, many of the stories that are in this book, I have heard. I had heard in various bars, I had heard at various reunions. I was not unfamiliar with some of the stories, particularly the funny ones. Maybelle Blair can tell a story. And in that sense, I already had that open to me. But when I started to dig and I started to ask questions, so tell me some stories about what was that like having to hide your sexuality? Oh, well, there was that time when, and so part of that was not because she knew me or didn't know me. It was because she is from a time when you simply did not talk about that because your life was in danger. Not only was your life in danger, but you could be arrested. She worked at Northrop Aircraft. If she got arrested because of that, she would lose her job. You don't get rid of that very easily. That was only part of it. I think part of it was convincing her. Now, she comes off as confident and strong and funny and gonna whip the world, and all of those things are true. I don't think she sees exactly her specialness and her importance. And so it was about convincing her of those things. So, it's not a yes or no easy answer to that question. I think it gave me the initial opening, but at times it also made it hard because she just assumed I knew everything. I mean, that was the other. I'm like, wait a minute, what? What? when, when did that happen? Oh yeah, I told you about that. So like, so it was a challenge, but believe me, sitting on a couch having a conversation with Maybelle Blair is perhaps one of the greatest honors of my life. So it was not really a hardship.
You look at her story, her life, really, and it is kind of the story of what it's like to be a woman through American history. I mean, through
Yes.
for the last almost 100 years here, and she kind of experienced
Yep.
all of it over
Yeah,
the
she
over this
did.
course, and
Yep.
still growing and changing with the times here.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
I wanted to go back to her youth, to her beginnings here. What can you tell me about that? She was playing baseball at the time, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and her brother, and well, her whole family was very, very dedicated baseball fans and players. Her father and her mother were originally from Texas, and her father's family had a team called the Blair Nine, and they traveled around and played baseball. And her mother played baseball, and so when they moved to California, and her brother and maybe her brother was several years older. He was a great baseball player, and when they moved to California, they had a field across the street from them. Now, keep in mind, this was during the Depression, right? So they went over and made a baseball diamond. And she tells a story about riding on an old gate while her brother pulled the gate behind an old tractor, and he put her on the gate as a weight so they could drag the field. They created ballparks, and in that sense, Maybelle created baseball opportunities from a very early age, and she's still doing it, by the way, at age 98. As a kid, she played with her brother. She learned how to keep a scorecard. All they had was a radio, and WGN had the Cubs games on the radio. And so that was the only team they could get. So she would go inside, sit by the radio, keep score, while her brother and his friends were out across the street playing ball, and she'd run out and give the updates. I mean, her whole life was wrapped up in it. And they loved it. That was their entertainment. And back then, you could fix some sandwiches, hop in the car, and go to a local baseball game, and it basically cost you nothing. And so, of course, as we all know, that's not true today. But so her youth was wrapped up in baseball, and she loved it. And of course, even back then, once she started school, girls were still sort of pushed into playing softball. And that was okay. I mean, it was as close as she was going to get, and she was a good softball player. And so she continued to create opportunities for herself and the girls and women around her. Her childhood was not easy. She grew up extremely poor during the Great Depression, and it was not easy. But she would be the first to tell you that her parents provided for them. They had a loving home and family, and just a really good childhood in that respect. Certainly, it was difficult financially.
You mentioned she plays softball, and is very good. She plays professionally. She goes to
Yep,
Chicago, correct?
right. She
Yes.
played for the
So
Cardinals. Yep,
that's quite a move. That's quite a big leap
it's
to go do
huge.
something like that.
Yeah,
Did you talk to her at all? Like, what is her thought process? What is her family's thought process? Well, how
I
does
know.
this happen? Like, that's a crazy back then. Even now,
It's
that's huge.
crazy.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
crazy. But again, in part, it goes back to the idea that playing professional ball, she was making as much and later more than her father made. And we're talking about the Great Depression. And so, when she was asked to join the All American Girls Professional Baseball League, she tells a story, and I included in the book. She'd been scouted because she played around California too. She played for the Pasadena Ramblers, and so she was sort of known. And so she was recruited, and she said, "No, my parents are never going to let me do that. We don't even know if this league exists. We don't know." And he said, "Let me follow you home. I want to talk to your mother." And she said, "Well, you can follow me home, but It's not going to matter. So they got there, and he talked to her mother, and he talked to her father, and her mother was still like, no, she's not doing that. We don't know if this is real. And finally he understood, and he said, Mrs. Blair, you don't understand. We're going to pay her $45 a month to play professional baseball. And her mother said, George, go crank up the car. I'm packing her and she's out of here. And she was. I mean, Blair makes that funny, right? But the reality was they needed the money. And and now it's not, I don't want it to sound like her parents are gonna, like sell her to the highest bidder because they needed money. It was indeed about an opportunity to play professional baseball. So, it wasn't easy. And when she tells the story, she was terrified. She had never spent a night away from her mother. Not even, I mean, at that point, she had never spent a night away from her mother. And they put her in a hotel. And at first, they put her in a hotel room by herself. I mean, the teams were in the same hotel. And she was terrified. So she pushed the dresser in front of the door, and she put a bunch of baseballs next to her on the bed so that if someone broke in the door, she would beat them with a baseball. Um, and, you do what you got to do, right?
Oh, geez. So, as you kind of mentioned, she doesn't play very long, or, she has some injuries. She has, it doesn't play very long.
In
How does
that
she?
league. In that
Yes,
league. Yeah,
yes, in the league. Sorry,
yeah.
that's a good clarification there. How does she look back at that time? Did she have any idea how relevant this was going to be for the rest of her
No,
life, or was it just a yeah?
no, I don't think so. I mean, do we ever? Do any of us
No,
ever? I
no, I
mean,
guess we don't.
when we're
Yeah,
in our
yeah,
20s or
yeah,
whatever, I don't think so. Again, for her, it was an adventure. It was, I get to play baseball. And she talks about that, the sound of the cleats on the concrete. And anybody who's ever played the game gets it. The smell of the grass. I mean, that is the beauty of baseball, like no other sport, right? So she got to experience that at a time when, it was highly unusual for girls and women to have those opportunities. So I don't think she did. She realized her legs were in pretty bad shape. And so she also realized by that it was 1949. And, she needed to get a job. She knew she was never going to get married. She needed to support herself. And her brother worked at Northrop Aircraft, and he helped her get a job. And she ended up becoming one of the first female directors of a unit at Northrop Aircraft. So some of it was she was being smart. She was being, you know, business savvy, and she has always been that.
yeah. I mean, you talk about her story as the story of America. Single woman, 1950s goes and gets a job. This is not a small thing.
No,
We were talking about here. Like, and then to
no, it
have
isn't.
this kind of successful career, I think it really speaks to, and maybe you can tie this back into her willingness to go out and try to go do the baseball thing, and her
Yeah,
drive, I suppose. And maybe
yeah.
that's where it all comes from. But it is impressive, even if
Oh,
that's not necessarily what
yeah.
she's known for today. It's
Exactly, exactly. And that's why the book is the way it is, right? It is not your typical sports book. And it's also not your typical biography. It's not 500 pages with 100 pages of endnotes. It's a rather small book, but that was always the plan. If you notice, when you guys read the book, you'll see that much of this is Maybelle Blair's voice. I don't mean I just take big chunks of interview material and slap it into the book, but it's her story. I'm a historian by trade, right? I could have easily written that 500-page book where we talk about all the things you're talking about, because in my mind, that's exactly what you would do. You would connect it to the Great Depression. You would connect it to the role of women in the Great Depression and in World War II, and certainly in the 1950s. And there's very little of that, and that was by design. But her story, man, it really covers some of the major ups and downs of women's history in the U.S.
So she retires, and then
Mhm.
really kind of has this like almost second life that
Oh,
begins
at
after
least a
retirement.
second. Yeah.
It's like a clear like yeah,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
almost like oh, and the whole world kind of comes around to women in baseball, and she really takes this leading role in it. I think that most people's familiarity obviously stems from A League of Their Own. I think that has just done wonders. I want to get this straight. She is not all the way May.
No, she's not. She's not. And she has a little bit of those qualities, let me tell you. But and so people as a sort of as a joke but also a nickname started calling her May. And so that's why I was very careful. If you notice, the book is not called All the Way May. And she is very clear. She's taken a little pushback about that over the years. People saying, "Oh, you weren't Madonna, you weren't," and no, she wasn't, and she never said she was. But there are similarities.
What was her involvement with the film?
She, as were a number of the former players, she was a consultant of sorts. She went to some of the tryouts with Penny Marshall. It was in Illinois, and Penny had a tryout for some of the former players to see if they could both act and play ball to be part of the movie. And as Blair says, well, most of us could still throw a ball, but we couldn't act worth a lick. So, but she was part of that. She was part of that scene at the end of A League of Their Own where the old ball players come back to Cooperstown and play a game. She was part of that. And she became personal friends with Penny Marshall, with Penny's daughter Tracy, with Megan Cavanaugh, who played Marla Hooch, and with a number of those actresses. And so she was she was a consultant, and again, she would be very cautious to not overstate her role in that.
Now, gosh, a couple of years back now, when they had the TV series, she was, I think, much more involved with
Oh
that.
yes,
Would that be
oh
fair to
yes.
say? Yes, yeah.
In fact, she was very much an important piece of that consulting team. She and her friend, my friend, who's passed away now, Shirley Berkovich, actually had a cameo role in the film. But the biggest thing was that they did hours and hours of interviews with Maybelle about the issue of sexuality in the league. As Penny Marshall's movie came out in 1992. There's only so much she could have done, and the folks who made the Amazon series talked to Penny Marshall. Before she passed away, they had a conversation with her about what they were going to do, and she gave her blessing. The issue of sexuality within the league was hidden, and it was hidden by their association, but also many of them, because as I said earlier, they were from a generation where that was simply just taboo. They were the first ones to say, okay, tell us about this. And she was reluctant at first. While she liked them, Abby Jacobson and Will Graham and Darcy Carden, and she grew to be very close to them, and they were fantastic. And they kept sort of urging her, but she was reluctant. And eventually she told those stories. And in fact, in one of the episodes, there's a bar raid in which Rosie O'Donnell is the bartender. And if you haven't seen it, I'm here to tell you it is one of the best hours of television I have ever seen. That bar raid was based on a story uh, that Maybelle told them. So she had a huge role in that. And then, of course, they were invited to premiere their TV show at the Tribeca Festival. And it was on that stage at age 95 that Maybelle said, well, I guess this is the first time I've ever come out. I mean, people were standing up and cheering, and they were crying, and they were laughing. And she was sitting up there. She told me later, I was sitting up there thinking, oh man, what's my family going to say? And of course, their response was, next. You know, that's like, really? You think they didn't know? But she had a huge role in that. And in fact, Both Will and Abby wrote a blurb for the back of this book.
That's great. At the end of the book, this kind of comes up, and she doesn't really have a answer for it, but maybe you have more of an answer. What do you think her legacy is?
As you alluded to, that was a tough one for her. She even said to me, "Why are you writing a conclusion? I'm not dead yet." And so, I get that. I get where she's coming from, and I
Yeah.
understand her reluctance to say, "Oh, my legacy is this." I mean, most of us aren't ever going to say that. I have to answer that in two ways. One is personally, and one is professionally. Professionally, her legacy is going to be the hundreds and hundreds of girls in this country alone who walk out onto a baseball diamond. Some of them 10 years old, some of them 12, some of them women. They are her legacy. She would never say, nor will I say she did that on her own. People like Justine Siegel and Baseball for All and so many other organizations, they are largely responsible for that. But who do they call on? Who do they ask to throw out the first pitch? It's Maybelle Blair. The International Women's Baseball Center hosted a national tournament back in 2017, the Baseball for All National Tournament. Buyer Stadium in Rockford, Illinois, is the historic stadium where the Peaches played. And the International Women's Baseball Center runs that. And that's where we had the opening ceremonies of that national tournament. And players walked in according to age and by their team, and they started with the 10-year-olds. And they walked into the arms of Maybelle Blair and Shirley Berkovich, standing at home plate at Buyer Stadium. And every single one of those girls, including the 10-year-olds, knew who they were. They knew that movie. They knew lines from that movie, and they were in tears the fact that they got to meet these women. That's their legacy. For me personally, much of the same, but also when she walked into my life in 2003, I knew the world had shifted. And in fact, later that day, I called home and I said, "You know how sometimes you experience something and you just instinctively know your life is never going to be the same?" I just had that experience, and my life has never been the same. I have grown, I have learned. Each of my three books I have written because Maybelle Blair has said to me at one time or another, "Kat, get off your ass and write the book. Um, Kat, let's do this. Kat, let's start a whole new organization called the International Women's Baseball Center." She is my friend, my mentor. She is my family. Um, and I could not be prouder to uh, walk where along the path that she has laid out for us. So I know she's 98 years old, but I can't imagine a world in which Maybelle Blair isn't part of my life.
That's great. I coach high school baseball, and last year I had a girl on the team.
Good for you.
And there was a lot of pushback from a
Yeah,
lot of people
crazy,
at
right?
first. Yeah, and unfortunately, she hurt her back playing
Oh,
softball. So she was doing double duty. She was playing
yeah,
softball in her own
yeah,
league, and she's playing
right.
baseball. And she hurt her back, and she only got about 3 at bats. So she got on base every time.
Yeah,
She could hang. She was there,
yeah,
and
yeah,
after a little bit, no one questioned her. My assistant coach this year is also a woman, and she knows more about hitting than I do. But I think both of those cases, you can make a direct line or maybe a
yeah,
wiggly line, but it goes back to what Maybelle did and is
yes,
continues to do.
yes,
And I see this consistently.
yeah.
I was down at spring training. Jen Powell was umping third
Oh,
base.
yeah.
Yeah,
They
and
need to call her up now. I just I know that's not what this podcast is about, but come on, MLB.
yeah, and it the craziest part of it is that I didn't notice it, but my mom who was sitting next to me noticed it. She noticed right away,
Interesting.
and I didn't.
Yes.
I don't know if that's good or bad that I didn't notice that she was just an umpire. I didn't
Yeah,
even cross my mind like this is a
yeah,
notable thing. My mom
yeah,
noticed right away. These are important things.
yep,
So this is my long segue
yep.
to kind of talk more about IWBC and your role and what they are doing and continue to do and hope to do in the future here.
Right. Thank you for asking. The International Women's Baseball Center is a nonprofit. On February 22nd, 2014, this is another Maybelle Blair. Hey, I have an idea. If you ever are contacted by her and she says, "Hey, Scott, I have an idea," run far and fast. No, Shirley Berkovich, a couple of other former players, two of whom Karen Kunkel and Jane Moffat have passed away, as has Shirley, and a couple of other folks, Donna Cohen. Literally sitting around over pizza and beer at Maybelle's house. We all threw in $20 or whatever, and we created the International Women's Baseball Center. And we did that because all of us had been active in the AAG PBL Players Association. Their goal is to preserve the history of the All American League. We kept saying there needs to be a location. We need to think more broadly because women's baseball is huge around the world and very successful. There's no place that preserves that history and that legacy. There's no place that tells that story. There's no home for women's baseball internationally. So we're like, okay, well let's do that. We were so naive. We didn't know what we were doing. First thing we did was write a mission. And that mission statement says basically we exist to preserve and protect the history and the legacy of girls and women in all aspects of baseball internationally. We had no idea that, what that would look like. Well, about a year later, I get a phone call from Perry Barber, who is an umpire and also one of our board members. She was in Rockford, Illinois, umpiring a women's tournament at Buyer Stadium. And she calls me late one night and she says, "Kat, this guy who's running this tournament just said, hey, do you know a 501c3 that is centered around women's baseball that might want that property in those buildings across the street from Buyer?" And she said, I thought, I better call Kat. So fast forward a month, and we're standing there on Buyer Stadium on a very cold November day. And the city of Rockford and the county of Winnebago negotiated with J&M Plating. They donated that property and those buildings to the IWBC. Now we've since raised those buildings and leveled the property and all that. So our goal is we're going to build an educational center and a museum, and what will amount to a community center on that property. But Buyer Stadium is quite literally across the street, and we run Buyer Stadium. We also are working to renovate and upgrade Buyer. It is a gem, and we want to make sure that it gets what it needs in order to be fully functional for international play. So the IWBC now we're going into our 11th year. We do a lot of workshops. We do a lot of fundraising. We also sponsor a lot of tournaments. And one of the most exciting things we're doing right now, we have just submitted a bid to the World Baseball Softball Confederation to host the Women's Baseball World Cup in Rockford, Illinois. This would be enormous. I mean, you talk about a full circle, right? The field where the Rockford Peaches played brings the world back to Rockford. And so we've done a lot. We're still raising money to build that facility, but just because we don't have the building doesn't mean we aren't doing the work. We continue to take direction and demand from Maybelle Blair. In addition to being a founder, I was the first president of the board. I am currently now the CEO of the International Women's Baseball Center. We've grown tremendously, and we have a long way to go, but we're doing great things, and it's that's hopefully Maybelle's legacy as well.
There are a lot of people I think who are very interested in doing something to help this out. I think that there's really been a push in the last few years for
Yes, there is.
women's sports in general. I think it's
Oh yeah,
really, I
absolutely.
mean,
Yeah,
just incredible.
yeah.
You know, I'm not a billionaire. If there's any billionaires out there listening, please,
Please, um,
send money,
yeah,
send us both money. Honestly,
yeah,
just give
exactly.
us all your money. Yeah,
Tell me where you are. I'll come and get it. It's
yeah.
really okay.
Yeah, but for those of us that aren't billionaires, are there things that we can do to get involved and
Yes,
help out?
yes. You can go to iwbc.org, become a member. We have a membership, and it's not expensive, but it is a way that you can help us reach these goals. There's also a big old donate button on that website. And, we say this all the time, every single penny, every $5, everything helps. And it does. Yes, we want that big sponsor. Well, where's Nike? Right? Where's Billie Jean King? So the thing is, yes, we want that, but we also know that by donating, people take ownership. And this is an important thing. We are not about creating a situation where we want to train girls and women to go off and try to get a place in Major League Baseball. We get that all the time from people. Well, why are you even doing this? Women are never going to be in the major leagues. I don't care. What is the percentage of boys who play little league that make it to the majors? Minuscule. But what they get to play, they get to try, they get to learn, they get to enjoy, and most importantly, learn from the game. And that's what this is about. It is about fairness and opportunity. And helping us helps that to happen. Yes, we want big donations, but we want the involvement of people. We have all kinds of events. If you're in the Rockford area or region, volunteer. And most importantly, though, know who we are. Learn about us. Learn what we're doing. Become a member. Tell someone else. There are a lot of women's baseball organizations, don't get me wrong, but we are the only ones doing this. And there is one home for girls and women in baseball around the world, and that is Rockford, Illinois. We need to make that known, and we need to celebrate that, and that's what we're trying to do.
I can tell you from running the Twin Bill, running the literary journal, almost half our submissions are from women. I just started a publishing company, 406 Press, and we are publishing a short story collection from Lauren McNulty about playing high school baseball as a woman and her experiences. And so there is these people out there who have these stories. They want to get them out there. And I
Yeah.
think that now there's the possibility too.
Yeah.
And people are
Yeah.
receptive to it.
And
It's
and
incredible.
sometimes it's not even a Maybelle Blair level story. And when I say level, I mean, popularity level. I encounter so many young girls and women who, when I tell my own story, you can see the light bulb go off, right? They're like, "Oh my God, yeah, that's the way it was for me too. I didn't realize it was someone, you know, I mean, I played ball before Title IX, right? So, there are so many of us. There are so many stories. And yet, every single generation of girls has to learn the same thing. Oh, you mean I'm not alone? You mean I'm not the only one? And I'm like, sweetheart, you stand on the shoulders of some pretty awesome women, and we need to tell you who those people are. But we have to keep doing that. And okay, we shouldn't have to keep doing that in 2025, but we do, and we will.
That was Kat D. Williams. Her book, All the Way, The Life of Baseball Trailblazer Maybelle Blair, is out now. Coming on to close us out is Mark Bennion, reading his poem, Thinking of Hopkins at Fenway Park.
Thinking of Hopkins at Fenway Park. Glory be to God for the crack of the bat, the thwack that echoes for years after the ball lands in the stands, for follow-through on the swing, bat flips, old Blue's spinning pointer finger, and the player's hand raised to the fans, for all teammates hollering in the dugout, waiting for the trot around the bases, their war cries and forearm bumps and spin, for Williams' red seat, the green monster, numbers retired, Martinez, Dorr, Big Pappy, Cronin, Yaz, Pesky, Boggs, Rice, Fisk. Whoever paints the batter's box and rakes the dirt, sweeps stadium stairs, tosses out the game ball. He lingers at the park long after broken records and rule changes. Praise him.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,